Well, a very good morning from Racing Back. The morning, my golly, yeah. Tell you why. It's the budget day in England today, and Jules and our guest, Keith Huewen, a little bit worried about how much tax they're going to have to pay. Also, we've had a lot of messages from Australia quite recently, headed by Jerry Burgess, mentioning a certain cricket series that we don't mention at the moment. And also, it's completely thrown the Harris house into complete disarray. The washing machine has had to be stopped because it's too noisy. And I've had instructions when this is over, I've got to switch it back on. So trifle worried about that. Yeah, yeah. If you would, that'd be great. And a very, very warm welcome indeed to our old friend Keith Huewen. Great to see you, Keith. We're going to talk about the Transatlantic Trophy. One of our followers said, let's do something on the Transatlantic Trophy. And when we started to have a look, Jules, we found out what a great series it was, wasn't it? Truly remarkable series. Racing 350, 350, 250 in Grand Prix racing as a privateer. It was tough. Working with Jules. Yeah, come on, give us a few secrets. You wear both the voice of World Superbikes, there's no doubt about that. And a bit of a spat you had with Barry Sheen. I'm sure that's going to come along. Don't forget, questions for Greg Haynes next week. Greg Haynes is with us next week. And get that grid together. Remember the grid, the Martin Rains competition. I'm going to speak to Rainsy later because me and Jules are finding it a bit complicated. So we're going to try and work out exactly what it is. But basically, you've got to pick your 12 favourite riders for the grid. And they haven't necessarily got to be anything to do with MotoGP.
Yeah. And the bikes they're on. And the circuits.
Oh, yeah, and the circuits. Right, here are the socials. I remember them. Space Cowboy, 4997, one day ago. We've created a bit of a thing with this Tony Elias and going back to Moto 2 and, oh, golly, yeah. Right, Elias was the first Moto 2 champ in 2010. In 2009 and 2011, he was in MotoGP. Reply, Dave Murray, 8428. Tiger Tony, I've never heard him called that, was in the 125s, 250s, MotoGP, Moto2 and MotoGP again. So we went back to the intermediate class, but not back to Moto2 since it didn't exist before 2010. Right. Tony Elias went back to Moto2 from MotoGP and won the championship in 2010. Banana Brook 5 days ago. Barry actually won on the unreliable TZ in 1972, question mark. I think that's when we were talking about the support races for the Transatlantic Trophy. Jules rushing off to fast check with a big smile. So we'll see about that. Barry Rose, hi guys, great show as always. Could you ask Keith as why he stopped his MotoGP podcast? It just seemed to disappear. We'll certainly ask him that. Moto Man 00. Come on, guys. They stuck a soft tyre in for Toprak. That was obviously when we were talking about the MotoGP practice, the MotoGP testing session. And Greg Haynes, when he's on next week. Hello. I've thought of another who returned from MotoGP to Moto2. We missed this, Jules, and we should have known. Sam Lowes.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, he absolutely did that. Flying Daggers 46, Dr. Rains, a legend. Dada Bartoli, 5 days ago. Thank you as always. This is a much watched listen every week with such a wealth of knowledge and experience interlaced with humour. Cannot understand how you're not every MotoGP World Superbike fan's favourite. Well, there you go. Red Rider, interesting podcast today. Loved to see the good Dr. Martin Rains again. Thank you once again, gents. So there we go. There's the socials. Let's get stuck in with our old mate, Keith Huewen. Just remind you, Keith, of course, 250, 350cc Grand Prix rider, 500cc Grand Prix rider, commentator with Jules. They wear World Superbikes in the real halcyon days. If you thought of World Superbikes, you thought of Julian and Keith. But I certainly did, and I think most people did. Keith, a warm welcome to Racing Back. Great to see you and Julian back in tandem. We're going to start talking about the Transatlantic Trophy. And Jules, I think you've got a fact for Keith about his appearances.
Well, the Transatlantic was an Easter series of match races started in '79 between the USA and Great Britain, a team event, and it became the season starter. Don't forget, there weren't that many Grand Prix back then, and you could get a world-class grid to do Brands Hatch, Mallory, and Alton over Easter weekend. And Keith, I think, is the second most capped, if you like, British rider with 9 appearances between 79 and 84. Does that sound right, Keith?
Something along those lines. It's a long time ago now, but I got to say how bloody lucky I was to be around at that period in time. I mean, the first time I actually had to qualify for the team. I think it might have been '79. It was my first year on a TZ
It
750.
was.
And that was the machine of the era. TZ 750s, they weren't very much money. You could do a little bit of work to them and get them to fly. Da di da di da di da. Anyway, Brands Hatch was the qualifier. And you went out and put your lap times in and it did all your bits and pieces and then waited for some official that, of course, I knew nobody then. I didn't know anybody to talk to. Not all the people that I know now, from Parish to Sheen to so on and so
It
forth.
was your second year with an international license.
Yeah, well, I mean, the international license was easy to get back then as well. You could just get it in a lucky bag if you were, with a packet of crisps, and you got a Grand Prix license. It was pretty damn easy back then. But so I'm laying under my van, and if you remember, when I had hair, I had long hair, and I'm under the van, and I'm trying to fix a starter motor on the old 508D Mercedes, as was the machinery of the day for transporting kit. Len Manchester Motorcycles, no longer there. And unbeknown to me, I've got half my hair now in a pool of bloody Q50 or whatever it was, oil. And someone's rattling on the side of the van, Keith, you've qualified for the team. We need you in the Kentagon, which was the area at Brands Hatch that they made all the announcements at. So I come out, I've got this old bloody T-shirt on, and I'm covered in oil, and I'm now going to be presented to the world with up on a stage alongside all these bloody superstars that I just wasn't expecting to have achieved. So I went up there, and to this day, honestly, to this day, I never travel anywhere now if I've got an official function or anything I'm doing without a spare set of clothes, because I'm mortified that I'm being presented with all these superstars in a dirty old T-shirt with my hair now slicked back with Q50 or whatever it was, and I'm up on the stage, and the first thing Barry Sheen ever said to me, "Am I allowed to swear on this pod, by the way?"
Careful.
Yes, yes. Certain words, certain words.
Okay, well, this isn't a certain word, but it is a typical Sheen word. Tell you the truth, mate, I've never effing heard of you. Those were the first words that Barry ever said to me. And the presentation went on, and it was Dale bloody Singleton with his pig under his arm.
Oh, yeah, I remember the pig, wasn't it? The pig farmer.
All that, the whole shenanigans that went with it, and I qualified for the Transatlantic, and they gave me the number 16, and so I kept it from that point onwards. Many happy memories, and of course, it was a time where we'd not run slick tyres on this TZ 750. It's Easter, for God's sake. I've only had my leg over it for 5 minutes, and there are some very good shots of me leading the Transatlantic field in places like Mallory Park out of the real Devil's Elbow when you didn't have a chicane before it. You just came down to it flat out. And if you fell off, you went to space or ended up in the lake. So really good memories. If I have to pick highlights, because you've only got half an hour on this pod, and I could go on for hours.
I've already put the kettle on, Keith.
Well, I've finished mine and thought about another one. Got the proper Yamaha mug as well. Would be Kenny Roberts, the first time I ever saw Kenny Roberts, and Mike Hailwood, who was a god for people of our era. Mike Hailwood as my team captain. And I remember he came round and gave me a briefing one time, and he's sort of, and I'm like, I didn't hear a word he said because I was too in awe at the time, if that can be believed. But when it came on track stuff, Kenny Roberts, the first time I'd ever seen a motorcycle being steered from the rear,
Yeah.
It's funny because he ran Goodyears and he shipped these Goodyears over, and we all thought that must be why he's so bloody fast. So I shipped some Goodyears over, the so-called spec, the Kenny Roberts spec Goodyears, and they were the biggest load of crap I've ever ridden on in my life. It was only because it was him that he was getting to be so fast. The thing was sideways everywhere, and he was just steering it. And go on. Jules?
You touch on a point there that the Transatlantic bought us for the first time. The Kenny Robertses, the Freddie Spencers, the
Very much
American
so.
superstars came over. Can I nip back to the first Transatlantic I saw, Cal Rayborn on the Harley, who
I think
remains
anybody will ever forget that.
Yeah,
Anybody
Martin
would say.
Rain said he was at the same race at Alton,
Yeah.
where Ray
I was at
Pickerel and
Mallory
Cal
the, one,
Rayborn.
the day before. Yeah.
Yeah,
72.
It was quite. It's
Amazing.
quite funny because the three of us we're sort of slightly hard of memory when you get to a certain age. There are certain facts that disappear slightly into the ether. And Julian and I were in Austin for the Grand Prix a few years back, and I'm walking through this hooligan round where they have it around the street on bloody great big motorbikes in a car park, effectively. And Jules said, "There's Dave Aldana over there," and I thought, "Shit, I've not spoken to him since the Transatlantic." And Julian dragged me across. I mean, I get slightly embarrassed by these things. And Julian, believe it or not, Julian
No,
dragged me across.
that I don't believe.
I know, but you are, like people that when you were growing up were sort of heroes of yours. And Dave Aldana was something a bit special even back then with the skeleton leathers and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
As a kid, you went, "Whoa, where is this?" And of course, an American accent then was quite new to the likes of 17-year-old Huewen. Anyway, he dragged me over to him, and do you know what? Pin sharp still, not just on a motorbike, pin sharp, could remember stuff that I did, let alone what he did.
Yeah.
And I was really, really impressed with Dave Aldana. Gnarly old hands, gnarly old legs, proper old school motorbike racer.
And he was the captain of the American team in your first year. And it was the biggest margin of victory of the entire series. Aldana, Roberts was in hospital, they had no superstars, but Aldana actually captained like a team captain, whipped him into shape, and they hammered us. Absolutely hammered us.
I've got a picture of me. I've got a picture of me at Mallory Park leading them with Dave Aldana behind me with a big A on his helmet back in those days.
Yeah, and the only
he was in the team, wasn't he? He was in the first one in 1971. Can I read the teams out because this is a real who's who of racing in this era. 1971. It was called the Transatlantic Trophy that first year, I think, wasn't it? And they switched it to the Anglo-American match races after that. But the British team was John Cooper, Paul Smart, Percy Tate, who was the captain, Ray Pickerel, and Tony Jeffries. I think that's a bit special. The American team, Gary Nixon, Jim Rice, Dave Aldana, Dick Mann, Don Castro, and Don Emney. So there's some names there, isn't there?
Well, I still see JC. I had lunch with JC recently, John Cooper. Yeah. I mean, he's still as sharp as ever. I mean, I love JC. And he's still massive on motorbikes. He still wants to talk. I think all us old blokes do, don't we?
Yeah. We haven't got nothing else left now, Keith.
I've got to get one more Aldana. I share Keith's admiration for Dave Aldana, by the way. And the only time I've seen Huewen ever starstruck was dragging him across the car park to come and chat to Dave Aldana in Texas. He was actually reticent.
Right, yeah, that's you should have bottled that because it's not an often seen thing.
Mike Hayward was the non-riding captain, wasn't he, in 1980? 1980 is a special one for me because it was our first glimpse of a very special world champion, Freddie Spencer at Brands Hatch. That's a day I won't forget. My God. Did he catch us by surprise, Keith?
I can give you plenty on that. I mean, like it was one of those situations where Freddie Spencer obviously he came here, he was just a kid. No one really knew that much about him. We knew he was hot. And he had Irv Kanemoto alongside him, of course, as his crew chief at that particular time. No one ever heard of crew chiefs over here. We just spanned ourselves or did whatever we tinkered. He got Irv Kanemoto. And the first time I looked at his TZ750 Yamaha, bearing in mind what I said earlier, they were off-the-shelf bike. You could buy them. You could get them to carburate. Carburetors. Remember them?
No.
you could get them to carburate well. So it was really working on the needle to start with. That was the key, was to do that. But then I looked at his bike and he'd got like an extra 2 inches. We'll go in inches, seems without retrospective. 2 inches extra on top of the header of the coolant tank, which you needed. I mean, two strokes, if you got them above 70, 75 degrees of engine temperature, the power dropped off like off the edge of a cliff. So you really needed to keep them as cool as you could without them seizing up. And he'd got all that worked out, all these little things. So having noted all that at Brands Hatch, which was always the first round, when we got to Alton Park, mate, third lap, outright circuit record, out the window. I've
Yeah.
never seen anything like it in my life. Freddie Spencer was just, I mean, I was in awe of him when I caught up with him in Grand Prix, obviously, because the first time I followed him at Harama, I remember following him down into the first shoe turn at Harama. And no tyre warmers. We never had tyre warmers in them days. They were worn out after 2 laps anyway. If we had tyre warmers on, they'd been worn out after 1 lap. So, and he chipped it in, and the front tucked under, closed the front end, I think is the technical term nowadays. Closed the front end all the way around the corner, and brrr, and it came in line. And the next left-hander, and brrr, that was his front tyre warmed up. I've never seen anything like it. But it's still Kenny Roberts Senior that is probably one of the few men that I consider to be a hero of mine. I mean, he was a little bit special. Quick story back to Austin in Texas, and you mentioned the I think the post TT a minute ago, but we were all in the what you got to remember in those days is even if you were a factory Grand Prix rider, your contract didn't preclude you from coming over and doing these international series here and there.
Absolutely right.
That's where you made most of your money. So the reason why you don't see it anymore, and the reason why Transatlantic can never, ever happen again is because Grand Prix riders, they've got 22 Grand Prix to do in a year, and sprint races, which is an incredibly long year. But also it's the fact that the factory contracts stop you from doing all of that. You can't ride a motocross bike, can't do this, can't do that in some contracts. So it stops you from doing it. But back in the day, you needed all those extra things. And when you had 120,000 people at Silverstone or 60,000 people at Mallory to watch an ordinary international race. So you will remember there's a piece of paper that came out recently that someone found a sheet of what the start money was for some of us guys at the post TT, I think it was. And Hodgson and Perry, they dug this thing up somewhat weeks after and mentioned it to Kenny. Look, we've got a sheet here with your start money on it, and it had got £10,000 for Kenny, £6,000 for Barry Sheen, which was even funnier in as much as if Barry knew that, he would have been apoplectic. There's no way his ego could have taken that Kenny was getting £4,000 more than he was for doing a British race. Kenny went on to say that, we had to stuff that money in the tank to get it back in past customs in America to get the cash back into the US at the time. And he was regaling this. And then Hodgson, he'd already got it all lined up, of course, because he couldn't wait to take the mickey. And he said, oh, look, there's another rider here, Keith Huewen. Keith Huewen, £25. Kenny Roberts looked at him, as Kenny would, as dry as ever, and he said, well, I guess we were both overpaid. But that was my first ever start money, was 25 quid.
25 quid.
And it rose to about £3,000 a start. And then within a year here in the UK, if I didn't pay £60 fee to sign on, they weren't going to let us ride. So that's what happened. The UK died pretty much after the Transatlantic. By the time we got to 83, 84, the financials had gone bonkers here, and we'd all lost out. Whereas before that, 79, 80 was really the end. When I was first with the Transatlantic, it was really the end of the bigger start money because you had huge crowds.
Yeah.
And those huge crowds never felt ripped off like they do now. The fact was that you had 100,000 people at trackside because A, it was good value, B, it was great racing, C, you had access to riders, you could wander around with them, they'd be sitting about all the time. And it suits the motorcycling public, that style. That's why World Superbikes is so incredibly popular, and British Superbikes for that matter, probably the most popular series in the world at the moment, because you have access.
Yeah.
It's a situation where the punter can join in and feel part of the deal. Anyway, there you go. That's a rant.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I remember going to Cabell, first time I ever met Barry, and he said, I'm going to show you something, Nicholas, because he called me Nicholas always. And he said, and is it Chas Wilkinson at
Cadwell, that is.
We went in, everybody was queued up, of course, and Barry never queued for anything, did he? He went straight to the front. He had this big ledger, and he'd look at whether he didn't have a ledger for Barry. He just reached down under the desk and got a big paper bag out and just gave it to him. Yeah.
And you go to any of the tracks, and it was Barry that was, he'd always push past everybody. We all stood in the queue waiting for our bit of bloody start money or whatever it was, prize money. Chaz Wilkinson, as you mentioned Chaz at Cadwell Park, all our wives and girlfriends, the wags, had to stand on the top of the paddock and physically count the people on the banking opposite at Cadwell Park. Because as soon as it was always based on the crowd, and Chaz Wilkinson made up the numbers effectively.
Of course, yeah.
And so you walk in there, and the first thing he'd say, look at you, he'd sort of look up and then look down again. What was your name again? He would always say. That was how he started, try and demean you immediately. And then he'd say, well, we didn't have a very good crowd. And then I because I'm good at arguing, I just went straight, no, that isn't true. You had these many and this many and this many. Well, I don't know where you get them figures from. And the girls used to stand up there. Part of their job, apart from timekeeping and looking after us in all other ways, was to count the crowd. Otherwise, you got ripped off.
Yeah. But it's the impact of the Transatlantic as a season starter as well, we shouldn't forget. Long before the Grand Prix season got underway, it was the only place to be for any fan.
Yeah, no, it was. And don't forget, you see, the first Grand Prix in Britain wasn't till 1977. So British fans had no chance of seeing these, the Kenny Roberts and people like that in action, did they? Because there was no Grand Prix. They didn't race at the TT, so this was the really big chance for them.
My window, Nick, was so small in as much as all that had gone before, and I was aware of it. But of course, I went from club racing straight into internationals like in 1 year.
Yeah.
But you could back then.
Yeah.
And and then you'd queue up at the gate at bloody wherever it was for your European Grand Prix, because the Grand Prix in those days was a European Championship. It wasn't a World Championship at all. We didn't go outside of Europe. So at the end of the day, you could queue up, bang on the door, and say, "I've got my license," and before you knew where you were in the first practice session, and you were on merit. There used to be people who didn't qualify to get into qualifying because they weren't fast enough. So if you turned up with your TZ350 like I used to, you were straight in because you made it work. Unless, of course, the ACU, which is an abbreviation of another cock-up, always managed to get didn't ever sign off as your federation that you were coming out to the Grand Prix. You'd phone them, you'd write to them and say, I'm going to be at this Grand Prix. Can you make sure the paper's never, ever in? So you probably missed the first practice session anyway, just while you sorted out the ACU rep, whoever it was, which in my case was a fellow called Doug Barnfield, bless his soul. He got knocked off a motorbike and killed near where I live. But okay, here's one for you, Nick and Jules. You'll love this. So I'm sat in Mike Trimby's motorhome. You remember this is in the very, very early days of Mike Trimby. IRTA isn't even born then. The International Race Team Association isn't even born then. And I'm in Mike's motorhome with Mike, who was then looking after the riders. It had nothing to do with the teams.
That's right.
Then. It was back in the day when he just looked after through Roberts and co. And I was fizzing. You remember what I was like, Jules, when I was younger? A horrible person. And I was absolutely fizzing. I wanted to kill people. And it was because the ACU hadn't got my federation ticket in, and so they wouldn't let me start in the first practice. So I'm in with Trimby, and I'm revved up and stuck to the ceiling. And at that moment in time, there's a knock, knock, knock on the door. It's Barnfield from the ACU. And he opened the door to step in, and Trimby just got my belt as I'm trying to get hold of Barnfield by the throat. And Trimby's rescued me from a charge of assault and battery on Barnfield back in the days, eh? I'll tell you what, it was fun, but it was so bloody amateur. It was so amateur.
Very hard work. And things like the Transatlantic is where you made your money, wasn't it? And those people
and internationals. I mean,
you didn't make money Grand Prix racing, did you?
No. Well, there was prize money, which again, Trimby got 3% of all the 500 guys. The 125, 250, 350 guys never were organised enough to do it, and probably too poor anyway, apart from the top two or three. But the 500cc guys, remember we're talking 500 two-strokes here, we agreed to give Trimby 3% of our prize money to look after our interests at racetracks because they were dangerous. And every single promoter was a different promoter in each country. So it was a different regime, different set of rules, almost different this, different that. So the fact was that it was a bit of a nightmare. So Trimby sorted all this out, but it meant at the end of the Grand Prix, we would normally have to queue up in this long queue
I've
at a
seen the
window,
queue, yeah.
waiting for our prize money, whatever it was. But of course, Trimby's now in charge of our money effectively. So everybody would hand him a big pile of our licenses, and Trimby would stand in the window and make sure we got take his 3% off and bung us the rest of the money. Integrity, trustworthiness, and he did us all a great job. I really miss Mike Trimby.
So do I. Very, very
Don't we all?
much indeed.
Can
Sorry,
Nick,
Jules.
can I just nip back to the Transatlantic for a second? Who would you guess at the most capped British rider?
Most capped British rider, Roger Marshall.
No, he did 7, I think. Ron Haslam.
Oh, of course. Why did I forget Rocket?
11 times.
Rocket, I'm grateful to Rocket, over a great number of years because he looked after me. I remember the first international I ever did abroad was Imola, the AGV Nations Cup. Mick Grant wouldn't go because they were only going to pay him $2,000. $2,000 to me could have bought an house. So they paid me the $2,000. It was the first time I'd ever flown on an aeroplane, first time I'd ever been out of the UK. And I couldn't get round Imola very well. I had this Mickey Mouse chicane at the end of the lap. And Rocket said, well, I can't do his accent, so I won't, but why don't you try this, youth? And so I did, and I beat him in the next race round there. I remember it. It was a special moment. And Rocket and I have been pretty good mates, and his wife Anne for a long time, and of course Leon nowadays as well.
And 500 Grand Prix racing. I remember, was it Le Mans? You had the problems with Barry Sheen, and I can remember the day so well. I'm sure you can. Just tell us the story.
Well, Barry and I got on all right. And Frank and Iris, his mum and dad, looked after me and my then 16-year-old girlfriend from school. I mean, bearing in mind when we first went out abroad, we were just bloody idiots. There were no sat navs. You had to read off a map. You didn't know where you were going. You got no clue about it. None of us spoke. Typically, English people don't speak any other language other than English and foul. And so we were in that situation where we needed Frank and Iris to look after us. And Frank was fantastic. He used to regale stories. But Barry, you're talking about 1983 when we were teammates.
Yeah, Le Mans.
Barry was not at his best then. I mean, I think that. Please don't let me. If I don't disrespect Barry at all, because Barry was a fantastic icon. He was the Valentino Rossi of the day. You can't argue with the fact he was a top man in this country, and he did great for motorcycle racing. We wouldn't have earned anything like the money we earned if it wasn't for the fact Barry Sheen went before us. But he was an absolute bastard. All the time behind the scenes, he would be manipulating in some way or another. He'd whisper in your ear, if my mechanic says anything about so and so, you will let me know, won't you? And as a teammate, I'd turn up at Suzuki to do the deal of the decade with Dennis Rowan, as it was then, who was managing director of Suzuki. And because Barry lived 2 minutes round the corner, some spy in Suzuki would ring him up and say, "Oh, Huewen's here." So I'd just driven 100 odd miles through the centre of London, no M25 then, for God's sake. So you had to go right away through the centre of town and get to Crawley, the other side where Suzuki were based. And Barry would turn up. End of conversation. He'd just sit and plonk himself. And Rowan was scared of him because Barry was best mates with Gerald Ronson, who owned the company that Rowan was managing director of at Suzuki UK. So he was a very awkward fellow. But I got stitched up, basically. My big mouth stitched me up, and the Motorcycle News editor of the time.
Oh, I was there when you were doing it, and I was saying,
Peter Law. It was a fellow called Peter Law. He didn't last any longer than that time because in the end, I got the tape transcripts, and so it was brought back into context. Well, it's funny. We're reading about Trump moaning about having a bit of his conversation chopped out of his interview by the BBC. Yeah. Well, if I wonder if I can sue Motorcycle News for billions because they chopped my bit of the interview out in the middle and only used the bit.
This is referring to a quote of Keith's, taken rather out of context, that was splattered all over the front of Motorcycle News.
Yeah.
Sort of
Sheen
Huewen
calls-
slags Sheen or something like
No,
that.
as Huewen calls Sheen chief bullshitter. I'll tell you what, the next Grand Prix was Imola and the Italian. And I had half the world's press trying to get in my caravan. Yes, caravan, no motorhomes then.
Yeah.
And the other half of the world's press trying to get out as fast as they could because everybody talk about it drove a wedge. But Frank and Iris was a bit off with me, but Frank was still pretty good. Ah, don't worry about it, mate. It won't hurt. Barry's all right, you know. And kind of we all got on. I mean, the Sheen family, I still, obviously Scott Smart, I still speak with Scott a lot, and Paula, and Maggie's not been well for some time either. But I went down to the Sheens to Paul Smart's and Maggie's place just before he was killed. We had, lunch in the garden, all the rest of it. I hold them in great esteem, Barry included. Obviously, it was a tragedy when he died, but. The problem, double problem you have. A, smoking is not good for you folks. Remember that, kids. And the other thing was, every Grand Prix you got to, they used to give you like this bag with like a tile in it or a medal in it or a program in it and all the rest of it. So when you signed on, you got this bag and 400 fags. You have Gitanes or Marlboro or whatever it would be back in the Gitanes. It was like smoking your bonfire, your barbecue. It was just awful. And Barry used to rip the tip off it and smoke the bloody thing raw. I mean, there's no wonder he ended up with cancer. And really, he should have known better because back in the day, Morris Knight, who was the partner to Peter Agg, the two owners of Suzuki, Morris Knight had throat cancer of the esophagus, and he got over it. I mean, Morris Knight was cured, but everywhere you went at Suzuki were no smoking signs throughout the entire building before it became politically the way we are nowadays. Can't smoke anywhere. Back then, you could smoke on aeroplanes as well. You used to sit, if you sat in the non-smoking section and you were just one seat row from the smoking section, and especially if it was a plane full of Frenchmen who all smoked like bloody, bonfires. Hey, I tell you what, we could go on about the old days, couldn't we? You lot?
Yeah, Nick, we've got 4 minutes left. Do you want to?
Right.
Are we going to get Keith back to do a proper Superbike? Program sometime in the future, rather than try
100%. I think he's off to the sunshine, aren't you, Keith, for Christmas?
Yes, I'm always. I mean, I try to spend as much time as I can now in Southeast Asia. I am kind of retired. I know it's a word that none of us like, especially us three. We're never going to be completely retired. I mean, I still do the Northwest 200, the Belfast Bike Awards, the that, bits and bobs, and I enjoy all of that. But it's meant that I've spent more time with my family now. It's funny enough. I get magazines and stuff that come here, and my girls, because they're all younger, they're all born, the three of them particularly, in fact, all four of them are born outside of racing. They don't know about that previous life. Yeah. And every now and again, something lands on the mat here. There was something that came from Northern Ireland the other week, and there's like a 5-page article in there, and they're reading it, and they, Dad, I never knew you did this. Dad, I never knew. Because it's not discussed. I'm just this pain in the arse that tells them to turn the bloody lights out before they go to bed and don't crash your car again.
Very quickly then, Keith, we will please come back and talk about World Superbikes. What was it like working with Julian, World Superbike time, especially? Briefly. This
is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke up his arse. Julian and I still talk virtually every single week now. Like he is. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He is slightly left of centre. I'm probably slightly right of centre. I hate that designation, but just to make it as an explanation in our slightly opposite way of seeing things. But never, ever, ever have we got into a situation where we can't agree at the end of an argument.
Yeah.
It's about politics. Should be about this as well. It's about what is the most reasonable argument that two people or a government can put up and come to a reasonable end that looks after the people it should look after and kills off the ones that we don't like.
Time for the 2-minute klaxon, riders. Get those bikes to the grid. 2-minute warning.
Okay. Well, Keith, thank you so much. I mean, we've only scraped the surface, haven't we? So we'd love to have you back after Christmas when you've come back from the sunshine. And thanks so much for, just the memories, mate. me laugh and bring back memories in so many ways. And a happy Christmas to you and the family. Don't forget, everybody, next week, Greg Haynes. So any questions you've got for Greg, World Superbike questions in particular. Don't forget, Greg did MotoGP as well, and he's been quite involved in World Endurance. And then don't forget to get that grid together for the Dr. Martin Rains Christmas extravaganza. And I'm going to have a word with Rainsy before next week, and we'll try and sort it out. Thanks once again. Thanks again, Keith. Jules, thank you. And now I've got to go on, sort the washing machine out.